Without further ado, I want to introduce our president and founder of this movement, of truly the secular pro-life movement, someone who literally started this organization in 2009 and has since then grown this to a worldwide movement. The one, the only, Kelsey Hazzard!
Wow, thank you very much for that introduction. I will endeavor to live up to it. As Teresa said, my name is Kelsey Hazzard, and I'm the founder and president of Secular Pro-Life. We're so excited to present out of hiding, and even though I wish I could be with everybody in person, I'm thrilled to have you all join us virtually. Tonight's speaking lineup really centers the people who have benefited the most from the Hyde Amendment, and that's Medicaid kids and their parents. I know you're really eager to hear their personal stories, so we'll get to them shortly. I promise not to take up too much of your time because I am not a Medicaid kid. I am, however, a lawyer, so my role tonight is just going to be to give a brief overview of the legal history to give some context to those personal stories for those of you in the audience who might not be as familiar with the Hyde Amendment. So let's start at the beginning. Let's start with the name. Why is it called the Hyde Amendment? Well, Hyde is for Henry Hyde, who is the Illinois congressman who first introduced the Hyde Amendment back in 1976. So that's simple enough. But why the Hyde Amendment? Why not the Hyde Act or the Hyde Law? That is because the Hyde Amendment is not a standalone law. It's actually a rider to the federal budget. Every time that Congress has passed a budget, every year since 1976, the Hyde Amendment has been tacked on with bipartisan support. And what the Hyde Amendment does is limit federal taxpayer funding of abortions primarily through the Medicaid program. So here's our annual budget, here's the money that's going to Medicaid, and you cannot put that money toward elective abortions. So if a pregnant mother is on Medicaid, it will cover her medical expenses for giving birth to that child, but Medicaid will not pay to kill her child in an abortion. That's the Hyde Amendment in a nutshell. Some of you may have heard of the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. That is a bill to codify the Hyde Amendment, essentially make it permanent so that we wouldn't have to go through the budget rider process every time. But unfortunately, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act is only proposed legislation. It had passed the House a few times back when we had pro-life control of the House, but it stalled in the Senate and it was never signed into law. So we do continue to have the annual Hyde Amendment budget vote. I feel it's important to acknowledge some limitations of the Hyde Amendment. It does not apply to babies conceived in rape. It does not prevent abortion businesses like Planned Parenthood from receiving taxpayer funding through other avenues. It also does not protect Medicaid kids in every state. That's because Medicaid is funded jointly by federal taxpayer funds and state taxpayer funds. Most states have policies for their share of the Medicaid money to echo the Hyde Amendment and prohibit taxpayer funding of abortion. But in a handful of states, activist judges have undermined the Hyde Amendment and forced state taxpayer funds to subsidize the abortion industry. So with all that said, despite those limitations, the Hyde Amendment nevertheless may be the pro-life movement's single greatest achievement, because over 2.4 million Americans are alive today thanks to the Hyde Amendment. And that estimate comes courtesy of Dr. New, who will address us later tonight. The Hyde Amendment passed exactly 44 years ago today, that first budget rider back on September 30th, 1976. 44th anniversary is today. If you were born through the Medicaid program in those 44 years, the odds that the Hyde Amendment saved your life are 1 in 9. Now, most people who were saved by the Hyde Amendment don't necessarily know that. Loving parents aren't going to just openly say, yeah, I would have aborted you if Uncle Sam were footing the bill. That would be a horrible thing to admit to your child. The Hyde Amendment matters both because it saves lives and because it sends a message about our national values. It says we don't believe people are better off dead than poor. It says we don't believe Medicaid kids should be targeted for destruction. And it says we won't force people of conscience to be complicit in killing children in the womb just by paying their taxes. Getting back to the legal history, abortion activists filed a lawsuit against the Hyde Amendment shortly after it was first enacted in a case called Harris v. McRae. They claimed that not using taxpayer funds for abortions was legislating Catholic doctrine in violation of the Establishment Clause, because what atheist wouldn't want their hard-earned money to be used to kill unborn babies? Well, this atheist certainly would not. Thankfully, the Supreme Court did not buy that argument, and the Hyde Amendment was upheld. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was not on the Supreme Court at the time, but years later, she had a comment about Harris v. McRae. She was surprised by the result because, frankly, I had thought that at the time Roe was decided, there was concern about population growth, and particularly growth in populations that we don't want to have too many of. She came under a lot of fire for that statement, for the eugenicist assumptions underlying that comment, and that criticism was justly deserved. Certainly her recent death does not make her immune from criticism. And I want to make sure that we remember when we hear that kind of thing, that the context of that ugly statement was opposition to the Hyde Amendment. Tonight, we celebrate the growth in populations that some people didn't want to have too many of. We celebrate Medicaid kids like Gina and Georgia and Valeria's sons, and millions more. We celebrate our neighbors, our friends, our classmates, our coworkers, and our family members. And we gird ourselves for battle because the Hyde Amendment is under threat. The average cost of an abortion is $508. The 2.4 million people whose deaths were averted by the Hyde Amendment represent $1 billion in lost revenue to the abortion industry. That's $1 billion with a B. And with the abortion rate plummeting to its lowest level since Roe v. Wade, and abortion centers shutting down left and right, even in blue states, they're clamoring for a government bailout. Pro-abortion extremists are taking over the Democratic Party, and they have signaled very clearly that if they gain power in Washington, the years of common ground on the Hyde Amendment are over. It's our responsibility to preserve the Hyde Amendment for the next generation. This is life or death for millions of marginalized people. So I appreciate all of you coming out of hiding to show your support tonight. It's going to take a concerted effort from every last one of us. Thank you very much, Teresa.